"Move to coach the pilot," hissed looming over Zara Washington in first class. His face reddened when she refused. "This plane won't take off until you're gone." Passengers stared. None knew she owned both the airline and aircraft, or that her hidden camera was recording everything. Before we dive into this incredible story, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below. If you enjoy stories about justice and accountability, hit that like button right now and subscribe to catch more powerful narratives like this one. Now let's get into how this confrontation began and what happened next. Zara Washington had never been the type to flaunt her success. At 38, she was one of the wealthiest black women in America, having built ZW Innovations from her college dorm room into a $10 billion tech empire. Her journey from South Chicago to Silicon Valley had been anything but easy. Born to a single mother who worked 3 jobs, hospital aide by day, restaurant server in the evenings, and office cleaner on weekends, Zara had learned early about both struggle and dignity. Their small apartment in one of Chicago's roughest neighborhoods had been filled with books rather than luxury. Her mother, Zara Washington, had sacrificed everything to ensure Zara received the education she deserved. "Never let anyone tell you where you belong," Loretta would tell her daughter each morning before school. "You belong wherever your mind and heart take you." Those words had carried Zara through MIT, where she'd been one of only 4 black women in her computer science program. They'd sustained her through countless venture capital meetings where investors spoke to her white male assistant instead of to her. They'd fueled her determination when tech conference organizers mistook her for janitorial staff rather than a keynote speaker. ZW Innovations had revolutionized data security software, making Zara a billionaire by 35. She maintained a low public profile, preferring results to recognition. Few people outside the tech industry could identify her by sight, a fact she leveraged regularly. Her most recent acquisition had been particularly personal and completely confidential. 3 months earlier, Zara had purchased Legacy Airlines through a private holding company. The airline industry's history of discrimination against passengers of color had long troubled her. After experiencing several racist incidents while flying commercial even in first class, she decided to change the industry from within. Only a small circle of executives knew about the ownership change. The public announcement was scheduled for next month after Zara implemented her plan for comprehensive anti-bias training and policy reform. On this particular Tuesday evening, Zara had been visiting her mother in Chicago, now 67. Loretta still lived in the South Side, though in a comfortable home Zara had purchased for her. Zara had refused her executive team's offer to arrange private transportation back to San Francisco. "How can I improve the customer experience if I never experience it as a customer?" she'd ask them. So here she was at O'Hare International Airport, dressed in her standard travel uniform, jeans, sneakers, and a Stanford hoodie. Her curly hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face free of makeup. The first-class ticket to San Francisco had been booked under her name, but without any executive status flags that might alert the crew to her importance. Outside, the floor-to-ceiling windows, thunder rumbled across the Chicago skyline. The departure boards flashed with delays and cancellations. Flight 1143 to San Francisco was already delayed by 45 minutes due to the storm. In the cockpit, Captain Malcolm Reynolds reviewed the flight plan with irritation. A 30-year veteran with Legacy Airlines, Reynolds had seen the industry change in ways he didn't always appreciate. At 58, he prided himself on running a tight ship. His perfectly pressed uniform sported every pin and designation he'd earned throughout his career. His salt and pepper hair was trimmed to regulation length, his posture military straight. Reynolds had started flying when Legacy Airlines catered to a certain class of passenger, as he often reminded younger crew members. The company's recent push for diversity initiatives ranked him, though he was careful to keep such opinions mostly private. His spotless record and seniority had made him practically untouchable within the company's hierarchy. As passengers boarded the Boeing 787, Zara settled into seat 2A in first class, placing her laptop bag under the seat in front of her. She plugged her phone into the charging port and began reviewing quarterly projections. In less than 24 hours, she would be leading a board meeting that would determine ZW Innovation's direction for the next year. The Legacy Airlines announcement wasn't scheduled until after that. The brewing storm outside matched the one that was about to erupt inside the aircraft, one that would change not just Zara's evening, but the entire culture of an industry. "Ticket, please." Zara looked up to see flight attendant Amber Parker standing beside her seat, hand outstretched. Amber's blonde hair was perfectly coiffed beneath her navy blue Legacy Airlines cap, her makeup flawless despite the long day. "Of course," Zara replied, handing over her boarding pass. Amber checked it, nodded with a professional smile. "Thank you, Miss Washington. Can I get you a pre-flight beverage?" "Water would be great, thank you." Amber moved on to the next passenger, a white man in his 50s wearing an expensive suit, whom she greeted with the same efficiency. First class continued to fill with predominantly white passengers, most in business attire. Zara returned to her spreadsheets, barely noticing as the final passengers boarded. The main cabin door had just been closed when Captain Reynolds emerged from the cockpit for his customary walkthrough. He moved with confidence down the aisle, nodding at passengers he recognized as frequent flyers. His practiced smile faltered momentarily when he spotted Zara. He paused by the galley where Amber was preparing drinks. "Full flight tonight?" he asked, his voice low. "Yes, Captain." "Every seat taken due to the earlier cancellations," Amber replied. Reynolds glanced back at Zara, who approved the passenger manifest. Amber followed his gaze, confusion crossing her features. "Operations as usual. Is there a problem?" "Perhaps." His jaw tightened. "Continue with service. I'll be back." Reynolds returned to the cockpit while Amber distributed drinks. When she handed Zara her water, her smile seemed strained. 10 minutes later, as the ground crew prepared for pushback, Reynolds re-emerged, making a direct line for Zara's seat. "Excuse me," he said, not bothering to smile. "There seems to be a seating issue." Zara looked up from her work. "Is there a problem with my seat?" "We need to make some adjustments for weight distribution on this flight," Reynolds said, his tone suggesting this was a routine matter. "We'll need you to move to the main cabin." The businessman across the aisle looked up, then quickly averted his eyes. "Weight distribution," Zara repeated, keeping her voice calm. "I wasn't aware individual passenger seating affected that calculation significantly on an aircraft this size." Reynolds' expression hardened. "I'm the captain of this aircraft, ma'am. When I say there's a weight distribution issue, there's a weight distribution issue." Zara noticed he wasn't asking any of the other passengers to move. She also noticed Amber hovering nearby, looking uncomfortable. "I purchased this specific seat," Zara said, producing her boarding pass again. "If there's a legitimate safety concern, I'm happy to comply, but I'd like to understand the policy behind it." Reynolds' face flushed slightly. "The policy is that the captain has final authority on this aircraft. Now, there's an open seat in row 27 that... Is anyone else being asked to move for this weight distribution issue?" Zara asked, looking around at the other first-class passengers. "Ma'am," Reynolds' voice took on an edge, "we can make this simple or complicated. Your choice." Zara maintained steady eye contact. "I'm simply asking for clarification on a policy that seems to be applied selectively." By now, several nearby passengers were watching the exchange. Amber approached cautiously. "Captain, perhaps I could..." "This is a security matter now." Amber Reynolds cut her off. "Ma'am, either you move to the seat assigned or we'll have to ask you to deplane." Zara remained perfectly still. Years of being the only black woman in boardrooms had taught her how to maintain composure under pressure. Slowly, she reached into her pocket and discreetly activated the recording function on her specially designed pen, a security measure she'd unfortunately found necessary throughout her career. "Captain Reynolds," she said, reading his name tag, "I understand you have authority on this aircraft. I'm simply asking you to explain why I'm the only passenger being reassigned due to weight distribution." His eyes narrowed at her use of his name. "I don't have to explain airline safety procedures to passengers." Actually, came a voice from across the aisle. "I'm curious about that, too." All eyes turned to the white businessman who had spoken. Brian Foster, according to the luggage tag visible on his briefcase, straightened his tie as he addressed the captain. I've flown over 2 million miles with Legacy, and I've never heard of passengers being reseated after boarding for weight distribution on a 787. Reynolds' face darkened. Sir, this doesn't concern you. It concerns all of us if safety is involved, Brian countered mildly. And if it's not a safety issue, then I'm concerned about why this passenger is being singled out. The atmosphere in the cabin grew tense. Other passengers began to whisper among themselves. This plane will not take off until this seating issue is resolved, Reynolds announced loudly. If necessary, I'll have security remove uncooperative passengers. I'm not being uncooperative, Zara responded evenly. I'm requesting clarification on an unusual procedure that appears to be targeting me specifically. Reynolds pulled out his phone. That's it. I'm calling airport security. As he stepped away to make the call, Zara quietly took out her own phone and placed a call to Maya Chen, her chief legal counsel. She kept her voice low. Maya, it's Zara. I'm on Legacy Flight 1143 at O'Hare, and I'm encountering what appears to be discriminatory treatment. I'm recording, but I wanted to establish a contemporaneous record with you as well. She briefly described the situation. Do you want me to reveal your position? Maya asked. No, Zara replied. I want to see how this plays out when they think I'm just an ordinary passenger. Throughout the cabin, the delay announcement had triggered groans of frustration. Several passengers had begun filming the interaction on their phones. In the midst of this growing tension, Zara's mind flashed back to similar moments throughout her career. The venture capitalist, who'd asked if she was just the diversity hire on her own executive team. The hotel staff who directed her to the service entrance when she arrived for a keynote address. The countless times she'd been asked to prove she belonged in spaces she had earned the right to occupy. Security is on their way, Reynolds announced, upon returning satisfaction evident in his tone. I've explained the situation. And what situation is that exactly? Zara asked, still perfectly composed. That I refuse to give up the seat I purchased because you haven't provided a valid reason for me to do so. The situation, Reynolds said through clenched teeth, is that you're disrupting this flight's operation by questioning my authority. 2 airport security officers appeared at the front of the cabin, and the confrontation that had been building was about to reach its boiling point. The security officers approached with measured steps. One was a middle-aged black man with graying temples. The other a younger white woman with her hair pulled back in a tight bun. Both wore the blue uniforms of O'Hare International Airport's security team. What seems to be the problem here, the male officer whose name badge read Williams asked, looking between Zara and Captain Reynolds. Reynolds stepped forward immediately. This passenger is refusing to comply with crew instructions regarding seating assignments, which is a violation of federal aviation regulations. Officer Williams turned to Zara. Ma'am, is this correct? No, it is not, Zara replied calmly. I boarded with a valid ticket for this seat. After everyone was seated, the captain approached only me, not any other passenger, claiming there was a weight distribution issue requiring me to move from first class to coach. When I asked for clarification on this policy, he threatened to have me removed. She held up her boarding pass. My assigned seat is 2A. The flight attendant already confirmed I'm in the correct seat. The female officer Rodriguez, according to her badge, glanced at Amber, who stood nervously nearby. Is that correct? She asked. Before Amber could respond, Reynolds interrupted. The seating arrangement is at the discretion of the flight crew for safety purposes. With all due respect, Captain Brian Foster interjected, rising from his seat. This appears to be selective enforcement. I've been a Diamond Elite member with Legacy for 15 years, and I've never witnessed a passenger being reseated for weight distribution on a Dreamliner. Certainly not after boarding is complete. Reynolds glared at Brian. Sir, you're now interfering with crew member duties. Both of you can deplane voluntarily or you'll be escorted off. Under what specific FAA regulation? Zara asked, her voice steady. I'm familiar with 14 CFR Part 121, which covers air carrier operations. It doesn't grant captains the authority to reseat passengers without legitimate safety concerns. Reynolds' eyes widened slightly at her specific knowledge of aviation regulations. The regulation that gives the captain final authority on this aircraft, he retorted, though with slightly less conviction. That authority must be exercised in accordance with airline policies and federal law, Zara countered, including Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination in programs receiving federal financial assistance, such as airlines. By now, nearly every passenger in first class was recording the interaction. In the main cabin, people stood in their seats, trying to see what was happening. Officer Williams looked increasingly uncomfortable. Perhaps we could continue this discussion in the jetway, he suggested. I'm happy to comply with any legitimate safety directive, Zara said. But I'd like Captain Reynolds to articulate exactly what safety concern requires. Only me, the only black woman in first class, to be moved to coach. A murmur ran through the cabin. Several passengers nodded in agreement. The confrontation had created a 40-minute delay beyond the original weather delay. The co-pilot emerged from the cockpit looking concerned. Mal, we're approaching our duty time limits. If we don't depart within the hour, we'll exceed FAA restrictions. Reynolds ignored him, focused entirely on the standoff. Zara's phone buzzed with an incoming text from Maya Airport Management has been notified. Legal team standing by. Continue documenting. Zara's mind flashed back to a similar incident 3 years ago, when she'd been asked to prove she belonged in the executive lounge despite having the correct credentials. That incident had ended with a half-hearted apology after she'd revealed her identity. This time would be different. This time, she wanted accountability, not just recognition. Let me be clear, Zara said loud enough for everyone to hear. I believe I'm being discriminated against and I'm exercising my right to remain in the seat I purchased unless given a legitimate reason to move. Officer Rodriguez stepped closer to Reynolds. Captain, could you clarify the specific safety concern? I don't have to explain operational decisions to passengers, Reynolds insisted, though sweat had begun to bead on his forehead. This is about maintaining proper order and respect for authority on my aircraft. It seems more like it's about your comfort with certain people in certain seats, Brian observed quietly. Reynolds turned to him furiously. That's it. Both of you off my plane, now. Officer Williams held up a hand. Let's all take a breath. Captain, is there documentation of this weight distribution policy you could share? I don't need documentation. I need compliance, Reynolds snapped. The delay announcement came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the continued delay of Flight 1143. We're working to resolve a situation and will provide updates as available. Groans and complaints erupted throughout the cabin. This is ridiculous, said an elderly white woman seated behind Zara. If there's a real safety issue, why aren't they moving everyone? This looks like harassment to me. The support from fellow passengers bolstered Zara's resolve. Throughout her career, she had often stood alone against discrimination. The public support, especially from those with privilege, was both surprising and heartening. Officer Rodriguez spoke quietly into her radio, then turned to the group. Airport management is sending a customer service director to help resolve this situation. Reynolds' face flushed with anger. This is an aviation matter, not a customer service issue. It became a customer service issue when you singled out one passenger without clear justification, Brian replied. Zara remained seated outwardly calm despite her racing heart. This confrontation represented everything she hoped to change about the airline industry: the arbitrary exercise of power, the uneven application of rules, the assumption that certain people didn't belong in certain spaces. As they waited for the customer service director, a tense silence fell over the first-class cabin. The standoff had reached a critical point, and the resolution would depend on who arrived next and whether they would recognize the injustice unfolding on Flight 1143. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin crackled with tension as Diane Martinez, customer service director for Legacy Airlines at O'Hare, made her way down the jetway. With 20 years of experience handling airline crises, from weather delays to celebrity meltdowns, Diane's measured stride and confident demeanor suggested she'd seen it all. But the situation unfolding on Flight 1143 would soon prove uniquely challenging. Dressed in a sharp navy suit with the Legacy Airlines silver pin on her lapel, Diane approached the standoff with practiced professionalism. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek bun, her expression neutral but alert as she assessed the scene: security officers, an agitated captain, and passengers with phones raised documenting every moment. "Good evening, I'm Diane Martinez, customer service director," she announced, addressing the group. "I understand we have a seating concern that needs resolution." Reynolds stepped forward immediately. "This isn't a seating concern. This passenger," he gestured dismissively toward Zara, "is refusing to comply with crew instructions, which violates federal regulations." Diane turned to Zara. "Ma'am, could you explain your understanding of the situation?" Before Reynolds could interrupt, Zara calmly recounted the event's boarding, with a valid first-class ticket being singled out after all passengers were seated, the sudden claim of weight distribution issues, and Reynolds' escalating threats when she requested clarification. "I'm simply asking why I'm the only passenger being asked to move," Zara concluded. Diane nodded thoughtfully, then turned to Amber, who had been hovering anxiously nearby. "Miss Parker, was there any operational directive about reseating passengers on this flight?" Amber hesitated, glancing nervously at Reynolds. "No, ma'am, not through official channels. The passenger's ticket is valid for seat 2A. Reynolds' face reddened. "As captain, I have final authority." "Within operational parameters, yes," Diane interjected smoothly. "Captain Reynolds, could we speak privately for a moment?" As they stepped aside, Brian Foster leaned across the aisle towards Zara. "I'm documenting everything he said quietly." "This is completely inappropriate." Zara nodded gratefully. "Thank you for speaking up." By now, videos of the confrontation had begun circulating on social media. Passengers in the main cabin were refreshing their feeds, watching the drama unfold in real time, even as they sat rows behind it. "Look at this," a young woman in row 12 said to her seatmate, holding up her phone. "It's already got 10,000 views. Ad number First Class While Black is trending." What do you think about the situation? Would you have spoken up like Brian did or stayed quiet? Comment number 1 if you believe standing up against discrimination is always worth the risk, even when it's uncomfortable. Hit the like button if you've ever witnessed someone being treated unfairly based on their appearance, and subscribe to our channel for more stories about justice and accountability. And now, let's see how this tense confrontation continues to unfold. Will Diane Martinez recognize the discrimination happening right before her eyes? What will happen when Reynolds realizes he's being recorded by multiple passengers? After a brief but intense conversation with Reynolds, Diane returned to address the situation. The captain remained by the cockpit door, arms crossed defensively. "Miss Washington," Diane began, "I apologize for this misunderstanding. There is no operational requirement for you to change seats on this flight." "This isn't a misunderstanding," Zara replied evenly. "This is discriminatory treatment." Diane's professional smile faltered slightly. "I assure you, Legacy Airlines does not condone discrimination of any kind." "Yet it's happening right now, on this aircraft," Brian pointed out, "and being documented by at least a dozen passengers." Reynolds stepped forward. "This is insubordination. I am the captain of this aircraft and subject to company policies." Diane cut in sharply, her customer service veneer cracking momentarily. "Captain, may I remind you that we're on a significant delay and this situation is escalating unnecessarily." Throughout the cabin, more passengers had begun voicing support for Zara. "This is outrageous. Let her stay in her seat. We're missing our connections because of this nonsense." A middle-aged white woman in the opposite aisle seat stood up. "I'll switch to coach if weight distribution is really the issue," she announced loudly. "Though somehow I doubt that's the real problem here." Reynolds' face contorted with fury. That won't be necessary, he snapped. Why not? The woman challenged. If it's truly about weight distribution and not about who you think belongs in first class. Diane raised her hands, trying to regain control of the situation. Everyone, please! We want to resolve this amicably and get this flight on its way. The resolution is simple, Zara stated. I remain in the seat I purchased. Captain Reynolds acknowledges his inappropriate behavior, and we depart. Or what Reynolds demanded. You'll continue disrupting this flight. I'm not the one causing the disruption, Zara replied calmly. You are. Officer Rodriguez, who had been conferring with airport operations via radio, stepped forward. Miss Martinez, we've received multiple inquiries from media about this incident. It's gaining significant attention online. Diane's eyes widened slightly. The situation was rapidly evolving from an isolated incident into a potential PR crisis. She turned to Reynolds, lowering her voice. We need to resolve this now. The passenger stays in her seat. I will not be undermined on my own aircraft, Reynolds hissed. Then you leave me no choice, Diane replied before turning to address the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, I sincerely apologize for the delay. Legacy Airlines is committed to ensuring all passengers are treated with respect. Miss Washington will remain in her assigned seat and will be bringing in a new flight crew to complete your journey to San Francisco. A cheer erupted from the passengers. Reynolds stared in disbelief. You can't replace me mid-duty, he sputtered. I can and I am, Diane responded firmly. This is now a customer service decision, not an operational one. As word spread throughout the cabin, passengers began applauding. Several approached Zara to express their support. You stood your ground with such dignity, one elderly woman told her. My generation didn't always have that courage. But even as the immediate crisis appeared to be resolving, Zara knew this wasn't just about one seat on one flight. The systemic issues ran much deeper, and her position as the airline's new owner put her in a unique position to address them. Meanwhile, in the Legacy Airlines corporate headquarters in Atlanta, executives were about to receive alerts that would turn their Tuesday evening upside-down alerts, featuring their new owner in a viral video about discrimination. The intervention had prevented Zara's removal from the flight, but the consequences of Reynolds' actions were just beginning to unfold. 1,500 miles away from the drama unfolding at O'Hare and the gleaming glass and steel headquarters of Legacy Airlines in Atlanta, James Wilson was working late. As Vice President of Operations, his corner office offered a panoramic view of the airport runway lights glittering in the distance. At 45, James had spent his entire career at Legacy, rising through the ranks, with a reputation for solving problems before they reached the executive level. Tonight, however, a problem was about to land directly in his lap. His phone chimed with an alert from the social media monitoring system, a safeguard implemented after several airlines had faced PR disasters from viral videos. The notification showed rapidly increasing engagement on multiple platforms around number Legacy Airlines and number First Class While Black. James clicked the link, his brow furrowing as the video began to play. He immediately recognized Captain Malcolm Reynolds, a senior pilot known for his impeccable record and equally well known for his resistance to diversity initiatives. But it was the passenger's face that made James nearly drop his phone. "Oh my God," he whispered. "That's Zara Washington." 3 months earlier, James had been one of only 5 executives present when Zara had signed the papers to acquire Legacy Airlines. The purchase had been conducted through a holding company with a public announcement planned for after Zara implemented her vision for transforming the company culture. James had been impressed by her detailed knowledge of airline operations and her commitment to addressing systemic discrimination in air travel. "We need to address this immediately," she had told the small group. Legacy has a troubling history of incident reports from passengers of color. That changes now. James had been tasked with reviewing employee conduct policies in preparation for the new training programs. The irony that Zara herself was now experiencing the very discrimination she'd planned to eliminate wasn't lost on him. He rapidly dialed the crisis management team, then placed an urgent call to O'Hare's operations center. As he waited for connections, more alerts flooded his phone. The video had been picked up by major news outlets. Twitter engagement had increased 500% in the last 15 minutes. Comments were overwhelmingly supportive of the unnamed black female passenger being harassed by the Legacy Airlines captain. "She's handling it like a boss," read one comment with thousands of likes. "Calm, factual, not backing down. Corporate America needs more women like her." If they only knew James thought. Meanwhile, back on the aircraft, Zara maintained her composed exterior while documenting every interaction. She could have ended the entire confrontation with a single sentence, "I own this airline," but that would have defeated the purpose of her incognito travels. She wanted to experience and address the reality of how Legacy employees treated ordinary passengers, not receive special treatment as an executive. This philosophy had guided her leadership at ZW Innovations, where she regularly used the customer service line rather than executive channels. "The true measure of a company isn't how they treat their VIPs," she often told her team. "It's how they treat the person they think doesn't matter." As Diane Martinez worked to arrange a new flight crew, Reynolds paced near the cockpit, occasionally glaring in Zara's direction. The security officers remained on board, their presence a clear indicator of the situation's volatility. Brian Foster, who had become an unexpected ally, leaned across the aisle. "I've filed a formal complaint through the Legacy app," he told Zara quietly. "Used to do compliance work for the FAA. This is textbook discriminatory treatment." "Thank you," Zara replied. "It shouldn't be necessary for passengers to police this behavior, but I appreciate you speaking up." Brian shrugged. "Too many times I've watched things like this happen and said nothing. Not today." Zara's phone buzzed with a text from Maya, her chief legal counsel Jay Wilson, aware of situation, asking if you want to reveal ownership to resolve. Zara typed back quickly, "Absolutely not. Let the situation play out. Document everything." She wanted this incident handled according to proper procedures, not swept under the rug because of who she was. If discrimination couldn't be properly addressed when it happened to the owner, what hope did ordinary passengers have? In the corporate headquarters, James Wilson was now in full crisis management mode. He'd assembled a virtual team, including legal, PR, and HR executives, briefing them on the sensitive nature of the situation without revealing Zara's ownership. That bombshell would only complicate matters. "We need to resolve this without special treatment," he instructed the team. "Miss Washington is deliberately not using her position to influence the outcome. She wants to see our systems work properly." "But the optics are already terrible," protested Vivian Chen, the PR director. "A viral video of our captain trying to remove a black woman from first class. We need to get ahead of this." "By following proper procedures," James insisted, "which is exactly what she's testing." Back on the plane, Reynolds had retreated to the cockpit, where he was engaged in a heated phone call with the chief pilot's office. His gestures were animated, his expression thunderous. Zara watched him through the open cockpit door, reminded of countless men she'd encountered throughout her career who couldn't accept being challenged by a woman, particularly a black woman. As a tech CEO, she'd implemented strict policies against such behavior at ZW Innovations. Now she would have the opportunity to do the same at Legacy Airlines. Diane returned from the jetway looking slightly flustered. "Miss Washington, I want to personally apologize for this experience. We are arranging for a new captain to operate this flight, which should take approximately 45 minutes. "Thank you," Zara replied. "I appreciate the resolution, but I'm concerned about the underlying issues this incident represents." Diane nodded uncomfortably. "I assure you this will be thoroughly reviewed." "I hope so. Because right now there are thousands of people watching this unfold on social media. They're waiting to see if Legacy Airlines truly values all its customers equally." Throughout the cabin, passengers were indeed sharing the incident across multiple platforms. The hashtag number #FirstClassWhileBlack had gained traction, with many recounting their own experiences of discrimination while traveling. Reynolds reemerged from the cockpit, his face a mask of professional detachment. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to the delay, this flight will now be operated by Captain Stevens. I apologize for any inconvenience." The insincerity in his voice was palpable. He turned to leave without looking at Zara. Captain Reynolds, she called, causing him to freeze mid-step. I would appreciate an explanation of the weight distribution issue that mysteriously only applied to my seat. Reynolds turned slowly, his expression carefully blank. A misunderstanding of operational parameters. Good evening. With that, he exited the aircraft, leaving a wake of whispers and raised eyebrows. What he didn't know, what none of them yet knew, was that Zara Washington's response to this misunderstanding would soon transform the entire airline industry. The hidden identity of Legacy Airlines' new owner was about to become the least of Captain Reynolds' problems. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds. The announcement crackled through the cabin speakers, surprising passengers who had believed the pilot had departed. Due to ongoing security concerns, we will need all passengers to deplane at this time. Please collect your belongings and proceed to the gate area in an orderly fashion. A collective groan rose from the cabin. After nearly 2 hours of delays, first weather, then the confrontation, passengers had reached their limit of patience. The flight to San Francisco, originally scheduled for 6:15 p.m., was now approaching 8:30 p.m. with no departure in sight. "You've got to be kidding me," muttered a business traveler across the aisle from Zara. "He can't just kick everyone off because his ego got bruised." Diane Martinez, who had been coordinating with the replacement flight crew, rushed toward the cockpit with alarm on her face. Before she reached it, Reynolds emerged, now wearing his uniform jacket and captain's hat, as if preparing to leave the aircraft entirely. "Captain, we've already arranged for Captain Stevens to operate this flight," Diane said, keeping her voice low but urgent. "There's no need to deplane passengers." "I've made a security determination," Reynolds replied, loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "This aircraft needs a full security sweep before it can depart." Diane stared at him incredulously. "Based on what threat assessment?" "That's my determination to make as captain," he responded. "Unless you'd like to explain to the FAA why you overrode a captain's security protocol, it was a checkmate move, one that exploited Post 9/11 regulations, giving captains broad authority over security matters." Diane's hands were effectively tied by regulations designed for genuine security threats, not retaliatory actions. Throughout the cabin, passengers began reluctantly gathering their belongings, frustration evident in their movements. Zara remained seated, her expression thoughtful, as she observed Reynolds' tactics. This was no longer about one seat or one passenger. It was about a captain willing to inconvenience an entire aircraft of people rather than acknowledge his mistake. Miss Washington Diane approached Zara with a concerned expression. "I'm so sorry about this further delay. I assure you we'll accommodate everyone in the gate area and reboard as quickly as possible." "This is a retaliatory action," Zara stated calmly. "Captain Reynolds is punishing the entire flight because he was prevented from discriminating against me individually." Diane's professional mask slipped momentarily, revealing she shared this assessment. "We're documenting everything," she assured Zara quietly. "This won't go unaddressed." As passengers filed out, many expressed solidarity with Zara. An elderly couple paused by her seat. "We saw what happened," the woman said. "It was shameful. We've written down our contact information if you need witnesses." Zara thanked them, touched by the support from strangers. Throughout her career, she had often faced discrimination in isolation boardrooms, where she was the only black person, tech conferences, where she was mistaken for support staff. The public nature of this incident, while uncomfortable, was bringing the issue into the light where it couldn't be easily dismissed. In the jetway, Brian Foster fell into step beside her. "This is beyond unprofessional," he commented. "I've already contacted Legacy's executive offices." "I appreciate that," Zara replied. "Sometimes systems only change when enough people demand it." As they emerged into the terminal, a small crowd had gathered. Several passengers from other flights had their phones out, having recognized the viral incident unfolding in real time. Airport staff seemed unsure how to manage the situation as it evolved from an in-flight dispute to a terminal spectacle. A young woman approached Zara tentatively. "Excuse me, are you the passenger from the video? The one the captain tried to move?" Before Zara could respond, airport security officers intervened, creating a pathway through the curious onlookers. "Please step back and give these passengers space," Officer Williams directed firmly. Lawrence Thompson, the airport director, had arrived at the gate, his expression grave as he surveyed the scene. Tall and imposing in his tailored suit, Thompson had managed O'Hare through countless crises, but the viral nature of this incident presented unique challenges. "Miss Washington, Captain Reynolds, Miss Martinez," he called. "Please join me in the Legacy Airlines lounge to resolve this matter privately." As they walked toward the exclusive lounge, Zara's mind flashed back to the moment 6 months ago when she had decided to acquire Legacy Airlines. She had been sitting in a different airline lounge, overhearing a flight attendant describe how a black family had been moved from first class due to a computer error that mysteriously only affected their seats. The casual way the incident had been discussed as standard procedure rather than an aberration had solidified her determination to change the industry from within. Now, as the owner experiencing the very discrimination she sought to eliminate, Zara had unprecedented insight into how deeply these problems were embedded in the company culture. Reynolds walked ahead stiffly, not looking back at the group following him. His 30-year career had never included being challenged this publicly, and his body language radiated indignation rather than reflection. Brian had joined their procession, having been invited by Zara to provide his witness account. Several other passengers had volunteered statements as well, their contact information collected by Diane's team. In the exclusive calm of the Legacy Airlines Premier Lounge, Thompson directed them to a private conference room. The contrast between the luxurious surroundings and the tense confrontation created a surreal atmosphere. Now Thompson began, once they were seated, addressing Reynolds with deference. "I understand there was a seating misunderstanding on your flight, Captain." "There was passenger non-compliance with crew instructions," Reynolds corrected firmly. "As captain, I have final authority over all operational aspects of the flight." "Including who is worthy of sitting in first class," Brian interjected sharply. Thompson held up a placating hand. "Let's keep this professional, please." Zara observed Thompson's body language and tone carefully. Despite the mounting evidence of discriminatory treatment, he was approaching Reynolds as a respected colleague, while treating her as a problem to be managed. "Director Thompson," she said, evenly, "this was not a misunderstanding. Captain Reynolds specifically targeted me, the only black woman in first class, and invented a non-existent weight distribution issue to justify moving me to coach. When I calmly requested clarification, he escalated to threats and eventually punished the entire flight by deplaning everyone." "That's one interpretation," Thompson replied cautiously. "It's the interpretation supported by dozens of witness statements and videos," Brian added. "Videos that are currently circulating on every major social media platform." Thompson's expression tightened at the mention of viral videos. He turned to Reynolds. "Malcolm, perhaps there was some miscommunication." "There was not," Zara interrupted firmly. "And framing documented discrimination as miscommunication is exactly how these incidents persist." Reynolds leaned forward, his patience visibly fraying. "I've operated flights for Legacy Airlines for 30 years with an impeccable record. I will not have my authority questioned by passengers who—" The door to the conference room opened suddenly, cutting off his statement. James Wilson stood in the doorway, slightly breathless, as if he had rushed to arrive. Behind him was an older black man in an expensive suit, Harold Mitchell, chairman of the board for Legacy Airlines. The unexpected arrival of 2 senior executives from Atlanta headquarters left everyone momentarily speechless. Thompson recovered first, rising to greet them with a puzzled expression. "James, Mr. Mitchell," he said, "we weren't expecting executive presence for this matter." Clearly, Harold Mitchell replied dryly, his gaze taking in the scene before settling on Zara. His eyes conveyed a silent question which she answered with a slight shake of her head. Her identity as the owner would remain confidential for now. James Wilson stepped forward. "We've been monitoring the situation. Given the public nature of the incident and the serious allegations involved, we felt it necessary to address this personally. Reynolds straightened in his chair, apparently relieved by the arrival of higher authorities, who would surely recognize the importance of maintaining a captain's authority. "Mr. Mitchell, I can explain," he began. But the chairman raised a hand, silencing him. "Captain Reynolds, I've reviewed the videos and statements. This situation has crossed from an in-flight incident to a significant corporate crisis that demands immediate action." The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically as everyone realized this was no longer about resolving a single passenger complaint. The breaking point had been reached, and Legacy Airlines, under its new, still-hidden ownership, was about to demonstrate exactly how seriously it took allegations of discrimination. The private conference room in O'Hare's Legacy Airlines lounge had transformed into an impromptu boardroom. The tension was palpable as James Wilson set up his laptop, projecting flight data onto the wall screen. Harold Mitchell, chairman of the board, sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable as he reviewed documents placed before him. Captain Reynolds maintained his rigid posture, though a flicker of unease had begun to replace his previous confidence. The unexpected arrival of top executives from Atlanta suggested this incident had escalated far beyond what he had anticipated. "Before we proceed," James began, his tone professionally neutral, "I'd like to confirm a few operational details." He turned to Reynolds. "Captain, you stated there was a weight distribution issue requiring Miss Washington to be reseated. Is that correct?" "That was my professional assessment, yes," Reynolds replied stiffly. James nodded, then pulled up the aircraft's weight and balance calculations on the screen. The Boeing 787-9 operating Flight 1143 today shows a center of gravity well within normal parameters, with all seats occupied as originally assigned. There was no operational need to reseat any passengers. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. There were other considerations, such as Harold Mitchell interjected, his deep voice resonating with authority. "Security concerns," Reynolds said after a pause, documented how James pressed. "There's no security incident report filed in our system." Reynolds' jaw tightened. "Sometimes a captain's intuition is not a substitute for company policy or federal law," Mitchell completed firmly. Lawrence Thompson, the airport director who had been watching this exchange with growing concern, attempted to steer the conversation toward resolution. "Perhaps we could focus on accommodating Miss Washington on a later flight with appropriate compensation." "Miss Washington doesn't need accommodation," James interrupted. "She has a valid ticket for Seat 2A on Flight 1143, which will depart with her in that seat." Thompson blinked, surprised by the definitiveness of this statement. Diane Martinez, who had been quietly observing, looked equally startled by the executive-level involvement in what would typically be a customer service matter. Harold Mitchell turned his attention to Zara, who had remained composed throughout the exchange. "Miss Washington, on behalf of Legacy Airlines, I want to express our sincere apologies for your experience today." Reynolds couldn't contain himself any longer. "With all due respect, sir, this level of executive involvement for a routine passenger issue is unprecedented. You're undermining the authority structure that keeps our airline operating safely." "This is not a routine passenger issue," Mitchell replied sharply, "and safety was never at risk, except perhaps the safety of our company's reputation and legal standing." James cleared his throat, exchanging a meaningful glance with Zara, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Captain Reynolds James," said, his tone shifting to one of formal address, "it seems you're not aware of who Miss Washington is." Reynolds glanced at Zara dismissively, a passenger who refused to comply with crew instructions. "Actually," James continued, "Miss Zara Washington is the founder and CEO of ZW Innovations, one of the largest technology companies in America." Reynolds' expression remained unchanged, the name clearly not registering significant importance to him. "She's also," James continued more pointedly, "the owner of Legacy Airlines." The silence that followed was absolute. Reynolds stared at James, then at Zara, his face draining of color as the implications crashed over him. Lawrence Thompson's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. Diane Martinez gripped the edge of the table, eyes wide with shock. "That's not possible." Reynolds finally managed. Legacy is owned by AeroCorp International. It was Harold Mitchell confirmed, until 3 months ago when Miss Washington acquired the company through a private transaction. The public announcement was scheduled for next month following the implementation of new company-wide anti-discrimination protocols. Reynolds looked as though he might be ill. I wasn't informed. The acquisition was confidential, Mitchell explained. Only the board and senior executive team were aware. His expression hardened. Miss Washington has been traveling on our flights anonymously to experience our service as an ordinary passenger would. Today's incident has provided valuable, if deeply troubling, insight into issues that clearly require immediate attention. Brian Foster, who had witnessed the entire exchange, couldn't suppress a small smile. "Well, that explains your detailed knowledge of aviation regulations," he said to Zara. Zara finally spoke, her voice steady. "My ownership status is irrelevant to how I should have been treated today." She turned to Reynolds. "The issue isn't that you disrespected an airline owner. It's that you would treat any passenger this way." Reynolds seemed to shrink in his chair, the full weight of his actions settling on him. "Miss Washington, I had no idea." "That's precisely the point," she interrupted. "You shouldn't need to know someone's status to treat them with basic dignity and fairness." Lawrence Thompson, recovering from his shock, attempted damage control. "Miss Washington, I assure you this isolated incident doesn't reflect our airport standards. Perhaps we could discuss this privately." "This wasn't an isolated incident," Zara stated firmly. According to Legacy's own data, complaints of discriminatory treatment have increased 37% over the last 5 years with minimal substantive response from management. Thompson looked startled at her command of these statistics. "During the acquisition process," Zara continued, "I reviewed every aspect of Legacy's operations, including customer complaint patterns. What I experienced today is consistent with reports from countless other passengers. Reports that have been systematically minimized or dismissed." She turned to Harold Mitchell. 3 weeks ago, we revised the employee conduct policy to explicitly address bias in passenger interactions. Captain Reynolds received that update correct." Mitchell nodded grimly. "All flight crew did. It required electronic confirmation of review." Reynolds paled further. "I may have skimmed it." "Evidently," Mitchell replied dryly. Zara stood commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "I didn't purchase Legacy Airlines to enjoy special privileges or preferential treatment. I bought it because air travel should be accessible, safe, and equitable for everyone." She reached into her bag and pulled out her specially designed recording pen, placing it on the table. "I've documented today's incident in its entirety. Not for litigation purposes, though my legal team would certainly have grounds, but as a case study in how discrimination manifests and how systems either enable or prevent it." Reynolds stared at the recording device, the full implications of his actions continuing to dawn on him. Captain Zara addressed him directly. "Your actions today weren't just morally wrong and contrary to company policy. They were business decisions that put our entire organization at risk. The videos circulating online right now are damaging our brand in real time. The potential regulatory investigations could cost millions. The litigation exposure is substantial." She paused, letting this sink in. "This isn't about you disrespecting me. It's about you failing in your responsibilities to Legacy Airlines and everyone who depends on it." The revelation of Zara's identity had shifted the power dynamics in the room completely. What had begun as a routine attempt to dismiss a passenger complaint had transformed into a moment of reckoning for everyone involved. As the implications rippled through the room, it became clear that this was no longer about one flight or one incident. It was about the future direction of an entire company under its new, formidable owner. The fluorescent lights of the airport conference room cast harsh shadows across faces, now tight with tension. Outside, the Chicago night pressed dark against the windows, punctuated by the distant blinking of aircraft navigating the busy O'Hare airspace. Inside, the revelation of Zara Washington's identity had transformed the atmosphere completely. James Wilson had taken control of the situation with the efficiency of an executive accustomed to crisis management. His laptop was now connected to a conference call with Legacy's legal team in Atlanta, their voices emerging from the speakerphone with crisp professionalism. Given the circumstances, the lead counsel was saying, "We recommend immediate administrative leave for Captain Reynolds, pending a formal investigation consistent with the newly implemented accountability protocol." Reynolds sat slumped in his chair, the fight gone out of him. The realization that his actions had been witnessed not just by passengers and airport staff but by the airline's owner herself had deflated his previous indignation. "I've served this airline loyally for 3 decades, he said, his voice hollow. "One mistake." "This wasn't one mistake," Zara interjected firmly. "This was a pattern of behavior finally caught on camera." She turned to Amber Parker, the flight attendant who had been quietly observing from the corner of the room. "Miss Parker, I suspect this isn't the first time you've witnessed Captain Reynolds treat passengers differently based on their appearance. Am I correct?" Amber hesitated, glancing nervously at Reynolds. "You can speak freely," Harold Mitchell assured her. "There will be no retaliation for honest testimony." After a moment, Amber straightened her shoulders. "No, it's not the first time. There have been incidents, particularly with passengers of color in premium cabins." "Have these incidents been reported?" James asked. "Sometimes," Amber replied. "But nothing ever seemed to come of it." After a while, most of us stopped filing reports. "Because you weren't being heard," Zara said, understanding in her voice. Amber nodded. "It became part of the culture. Some captains had preferences. We worked around them to protect passengers when we could." Reynolds began to protest, but Harold Mitchell silenced him with a raised hand. "Captain, I suggest you consult with your union representative before saying anything further." Zara stood smoothing her Stanford hoodie, the casual attire that had likely contributed to Reynolds' assumptions about her. "While I appreciate the legal team's recommendation, I'd like to propose a more comprehensive approach." She began to outline a series of actions that went far beyond the individual case at hand. "First, Captain Reynolds will indeed be placed on administrative leave pending investigation. But this isn't just about one employee. Within 24 hours, I want emergency bias training initiated for all customer-facing staff, starting with flight crews." James Wilson was taking rapid notes on his tablet as Zara continued. "Second, we're implementing a comprehensive review of all discrimination complaints filed in the past 5 years, with independent investigators assessing how they were handled." She turned to Diane Martinez. "Third, we're establishing a new passenger advocacy office with direct reporting lines to executive leadership. Miss Martinez, given your handling of today's situation, I'd like you to consider heading this initiative." Diane's eyes widened in surprise. "I would be honored." "Fourth," Zara continued, "we're revising our compensation structure for management to include metrics on inclusive customer experience. Leaders who maintain environments where discrimination occurs will see that reflected in their performance evaluations and bonuses." Harold Mitchell nodded approvingly. "The board will support these initiatives." Zara wasn't finished. "Finally, we're going public with this incident and our response. Not a carefully sanitized press release, but an honest acknowledgement of what happened and the concrete steps we're taking to ensure it never happens again." This last point caused visible consternation among the executives. Lawrence Thompson, the airport director who had been trying to minimize the situation from the beginning, looked particularly alarmed. "Miss Washington, with all due respect, publicizing an incident like this could severely damage Legacy's reputation and—" "Our reputation is already damaged," Zara interrupted. "There are dozens of videos circulating online right now. The question isn't whether this becomes public, it's whether we demonstrate authentic accountability or attempt a cover-up." She addressed the entire room. Legacy Airlines has a new legacy to build. One where incidents like this are neither tolerated nor hidden. Where we acknowledge our failures and commit to genuine change. "The financial implications," Thompson began, "are substantial," Zara agreed. But the cost of continuing our current course is far greater, both morally and financially. She turned to Brian Foster, who had witnessed the entire transformation of the situation. Mr. Foster, you stood up when it would have been easier to look away. That's exactly the culture we need to foster throughout Legacy. Brian nodded. I appreciate that. Though I have to say this isn't how I expected my business trip to San Francisco to go. A small smile crossed Zara's face, the first since the ordeal began. Nor mine. But sometimes the most important journeys aren't the ones on our itinerary. She turned back to the executives. I want the new flight crew ready within 30 minutes. All passengers should receive full refunds, regardless of whether they continue their journey with us tonight, plus vouchers for future travel. Those who choose to remain on Flight 1143 will help us begin the process of rebuilding trust. Reynolds finally spoke, his voice subdued. And what happens to me? Zara regarded him thoughtfully. That depends on you, Captain. The investigation will proceed according to company policy. If you choose to participate in the bias training program and demonstrate genuine commitment to change, there may be a path forward for you at Legacy. Not in your current role, certainly, but perhaps in training or compliance, where your experience could help prevent others from making similar mistakes. It was an offer of accountability with dignity, not the destruction of a 30-year career, but a demand for genuine atonement and growth. As the meeting concluded, the various parties dispersed to implement Zara's directives. Reynolds was escorted to a separate room to meet with his union representative. Diane hurried to arrange compensation for the delayed passengers. James and Harold huddled to draft the public statement that would accompany the following day's accelerated announcement of Zara's acquisition. In the midst of this activity, Zara found herself momentarily alone with Brian Foster. You could have ended this immediately by revealing who you were, he observed. Why didn't you? Zara considered the question. Because this was never about me receiving special treatment. It was about ensuring equal treatment for everyone. She glanced at her watch. Nearly 4 hours had passed since the confrontation began. I should check on the other passengers. They deserve an explanation for the delay. From the airline owner herself, Brian asked with a raised eyebrow. From someone who experienced what they witnessed, Zara corrected him. Someone who's committed to making it right. As they walked back toward the gate area where passengers from Flight 1143 waited for updates, Zara knew that the real work of transformation was just beginning. The accountability demonstrated tonight was only the first step in a journey that would reshape not just Legacy Airlines, but potentially the standards of the entire industry. 6 months later, Zara Washington stood at the podium in Legacy Airlines' headquarters auditorium, addressing a room filled with employees, industry representatives, and media. The wall behind her displayed the company's new tagline, Legacy Airlines, everyone belongs in first class. When I became Legacy's owner last year, she began, her voice carrying confidently through the space. I didn't plan to announce it by being asked to give up my seat. A ripple of knowing laughter moved through the audience. But what happened that night at O'Hare has become the catalyst for the most significant transformation in our company's history. The incident had indeed become legendary within the company and throughout the industry, a watershed moment that had sparked genuine change rather than the typical cycle of public apology followed by business as usual. The statistics displayed on the screen behind Zara told the story in numbers. Customer satisfaction scores up 28%. Employee retention improved by 33%. Discrimination complaints down by 62%. But the true transformation ran deeper than metrics could capture. In the front row sat Diane Martinez, now Vice President of the newly created Passenger Advocacy Division. Her team of 30 dedicated professionals worked across the system to ensure that customer concerns were addressed promptly and systemically rather than dismissed as isolated incidents. Beside her sat Brian Foster, who had joined Legacy's Customer Experience Advisory Board, a diverse group of frequent travelers who provided regular feedback on the airline's practices and policies. What had begun as a chance encounter on Flight 1143 had evolved into a valued business relationship. 6 months ago, Zara continued, we publicly committed to 5 major initiatives. She began counting them off on her fingers. Comprehensive bias training for all staff. Independent review of past discrimination complaints. Creation of the Passenger Advocacy Office. Revision of our executive compensation structure to include inclusion metrics. And full transparency about our challenges and progress. She paused, surveying the room. Today, I'm proud to report that we've not only met those commitments, we've exceeded them. The changes had been neither easy nor universally embraced. Some longtime employees had resisted the new direction. A few executives had departed uncomfortable with the heightened accountability standards. But the culture shift had taken hold, reinforced by Zara's hands-on leadership and clear vision. The transformation we're celebrating today isn't just about policies or procedures, she emphasized. It's about people and perspectives. Her gaze found Malcolm Reynolds seated in the middle of the audience. After serving his suspension and completing extensive training, he had indeed found a new role within the company, not in flight operations, but in the training department, where he now helped develop scenarios based on real incidents to prepare crews for handling bias appropriately. His journey from resistance to reflection had not been simple or straightforward. The initial suspension had been followed by defensiveness, then anger, then finally, after numerous conversations with Zara and other leaders, genuine introspection. His willingness to acknowledge his mistakes publicly and commit to growth had become an unexpected asset in Legacy's transformation. Some of our most powerful advocates for change, Zara noted, are those who once upheld the systems we needed to reform. The press conference portion of the event concluded, and as attendees mingled during the reception that followed, Zara found herself approached by a professor from Harvard Business School. "Miss Washington," the professor said, extending her hand, "I want to thank you for allowing us to develop a case study based on the Flight 1143 incident. It's already become one of our most requested teaching materials for courses on leadership, crisis management, and organizational culture." "I'm glad something constructive came from it," Zara replied. "What seems to resonate most with your students?" "The authenticity," the professor answered, without hesitation. "You could have leveraged your position immediately, but you chose to experience the system as any other passenger would. Then you used that insight to create meaningful change rather than just personal accommodation. That's a powerful lesson in leadership." Later that afternoon, Zara boarded a Legacy flight to San Francisco, this time openly as the company's owner. The difference in the experience was palpable. Not because she received special treatment, but because the entire atmosphere of the airline had shifted. The diverse flight crew operated with a new confidence and warmth. Passengers were greeted with genuine respect, regardless of appearance or status. The captain, a young black woman who had been promoted in Legacy's renewed commitment to advancement based on merit rather than seniority, personally welcomed Zara aboard. "It's an honor to have you flying with us today," Miss Washington Captain Jasmine Brooks said. "Though I have to say your leadership has made every flight better, whether you're on it or not." As the plane climbed into the clear blue sky, Zara reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. The transformation of Legacy Airlines had not only improved the experience of countless passengers and employees, it had begun influencing industry standards more broadly. Other airlines, noting Legacy's improving reputation and financial performance, had initiated their own reviews of inclusion practices. The incident that might have remained a painful memory of discrimination had instead become a powerful testament to possibility proof that systems could change when leaders had the courage to experience them honestly and address their flaws directly. Zara opened her laptop to review the latest passenger satisfaction data. The numbers were encouraging, but she was more interested in the stories behind them, the experiences of real people whose journeys were now marked by dignity rather than discrimination. As Legacy Airlines continued its ascent both literally and figuratively, Zara knew that the work of transformation was ongoing. Culture change wasn't a destination, but a journey, one that required constant vigilance, honest feedback, and the courage to acknowledge when course corrections were needed. But looking around the cabin, seeing passengers of all backgrounds being served with equal respect, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The vision she had held when purchasing the airline was beginning to materialize, a transportation system where everyone truly belonged, regardless of appearance, background, or social status. The true legacy of Legacy Airlines was still being written, one flight, one passenger, one interaction at a time. This story powerfully illustrates how discrimination often persists because systems are designed to protect those with authority rather than those facing injustice. Zara's approach teaches us that true change requires experiencing problems firsthand rather than viewing them from a privileged position. By choosing not to reveal her ownership immediately, she gained authentic insight into how ordinary passengers are treated. The transformation shows that meaningful change requires both accountability and opportunity for growth. Reynolds wasn't simply punished, he was given a path to become part of the solution. This balance between justice and redemption creates sustainable change rather than temporary fixes. Perhaps most importantly, the story highlights the critical role of allies like Brian Foster. Discrimination thrives in silence, and having someone with privilege speak up can make all the difference. One voice of support can inspire others to act, creating a ripple effect that transforms toxic cultures into inclusive ones. Real progress happens when leaders are willing to experience their own systems as vulnerable users do. Only then can they truly understand what needs to change and commit to authentic transformation. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wished someone would stand up? Or maybe you were the one who spoke out. Share your experience in the comments below. What impact did it have on you and others involved? Your story might inspire someone to find their voice in a similar situation. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button to help others find it too. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives about justice, accountability, and transformation in everyday life. And don't forget to share this video with someone who might need encouragement to speak up when they witness injustice. Thank you for joining us on this journey of examining how small acts of courage can lead to significant change. Remember, sometimes the most powerful position isn't the one at the top, it's standing beside someone who needs an ally.